Number 1. So, I was very young when this happened. So young, in fact, that I don't remember a whole lot, only bits and pieces. I'd say that I was 5 or 6 years old. My parents filled in the gaps for me, so I'm going to tell the whole version of the story, both my parts and theirs. We were living in an old farmhouse at the time. My parents were poor, so they rented from a landlord that owned a few small properties in the area. My dad worked in the steel mill on the midnight shift, so he worked some odd hours. This is relevant because it might be the only reason that we're still alive and that I'm able to write this story today.
Help! He's going to rape me! Help me!
We jolted out of bed and were fully awake in an instant. I was sleeping in my bed with my parents that night because I was having some awful night terrors. My dad, who had just switched from midnight shifts to days, jumped out of bed and cautiously made his way down the stairs, grabbing a stoking pick from the fireplace in the living room. He got to the door when he heard it again.
Help! Help! Oh my God, he's coming!
The woman's voice on the other side of the door began sobbing hysterically. "We have to help her. Open the door," said my mother. My mum is an inherently good woman who always goes out of her way to help people every single day of her life. She reached out for the deadbolt, but my dad stopped her. He shot her a look and said cautiously through the door, "What's going on? Who's after you and where is he?" The voice through the door responded,
I just need to get in before he gets here. Please. Please.
More sobs. My father turned on the porch light and said, "Stay up on the porch with your back against the door." He then opened the deadbolt, but not the chain lock. He slipped a brick that we used as a doorstop through the crack. "Take this and use it to defend yourself if you need it. I'll be right on the other side of this door, and if he comes after you, I'll come out and help. In the meantime, I'm calling the police. They'll be here soon." This is when the woman starts to absolutely lose her mind. She began slamming her whole body into the door with a mindless fury.
What the fuck's wrong with you? Let me in this goddamn house right now. What kind of fucking people are you?
My dad forced the door shut and clicked the deadbolt home again. He immediately called the police, and they came within 10 minutes. When they arrived, the woman was simply gone. The doorstop brick was sitting on one of the porch steps. My parents gave a description of the events and the woman as best they could. We tried our best to get some sleep in the following nights, but my mum and dad checked all of the locks and windows several times throughout the night. I don't remember understanding what happened, but I remember thinking that my parents were acting strange and wondering why they didn't help this woman. I thought the man snuck up and got her while we were calling the police. A few days later, we found out that the police had been called for a similar situation at a different house. My dad's brother-in-law worked in law enforcement and told us that that time the police happened to have a car down the street and arrived without lights and sirens. The officers saw the woman that my parents had described at the front door on top of the porch. When they began walking up to her, a man dashed out of the bushes from the side of the porch. They chased him down pretty quickly and recovered a long kitchen knife from the bushes where he had been hiding. The man and the woman had been working together to try to gain entry to houses. The police surmised that the woman would get people to open their doors and let her in, and then she would let her partner in. God only knows what they would have done once they got inside. Once I heard this story and put it together with my memories of the event, it sent chills down my spine. Imagine what would have happened if my dad had been working the midnight shifts, or if he had just been asleep. He grew up in a very bad neighborhood, Gary, Indiana, so he was always cautious about people around him. Usually it was mildly irritating, but that time it may have saved our lives. Number 2. This happened on a Norwegian peninsula when I was about 15 years old. It must have been 2006, give or take a year. Regardless, it was Halloween night, and I didn't really have any plans. Too old for trick-or-treating, too young for partying. It was a small peninsula anyway, so there wasn't much going on. I was just sat at home, playing RuneScape on my desktop. This continued until sundown. You could say I was mildly addicted to that game. I usually like to play with the lights off. Bad for your eyes, but I like the mood it set. Anyway, it's around 9 PM. My mum comes into my room and pats me on the shoulder. "Didn't you hear me? I said I'm going out for 20 minutes, she said. I had my noise-cancelling headphones on, so I was oblivious to the fact that she'd been shouting to me. She heads downstairs, and I hear the door slam. I put my headphones back on, and sink back into my own little pixelated world. As such, I can't really tell you how much time passed when this happened. When you looked out of my bedroom door, which at the time was wide open, you could see down into the long corridor leading to my mum's room opposite. Since all of the lights were off, I could only really make out the outlines of all the objects, and that was only after my eyes adjusted after looking at the bright computer screen. Until then, it was like looking into a dark void of total blackness. You know when one of your senses has picked up on something that you're not totally conscious of yet, and you feel a little uneasy? Well, that happened to me while I was playing. It felt like someone else was around me, like that I'm being watched sensation. I figure my mum came back from wherever she went, and that I just hadn't heard her due to my headphones. But if that was the case, why hadn't she turned the lights on? I looked down into the dark corridor. At the far end, something's glowing. It's large and fluorescent green. It's spherical. Looks like a floating orb of some kind. I freak out and whip off my headphones. After looking at it for a moment, it becomes clear that this isn't an orb at all, or anything supernatural like that. There's 2 black holes where eyes should be, and a dark slit for a mouth. It's a glow-in-the-dark mask, and it's not floating. Someone's wearing it. Whoever it is facing me. I can't make out the rest of their body, but the head is definitely looking in my direction and is slowly inching closer. It's some sort of distorted, expressionless face. It's hard to describe, but the image of it is burned deep into my memory. Realizing he's been spotted, the guy freezes. We just stare at each other for what felt like the longest time. He raises a finger up to the lips of his mask. "Shh, I'm just a trick-or-treater." It's a thick, manly voice, one I didn't recognize. In a state of shock, and not really knowing how to react, I just sit there, keeping my eyes on him. "So, trick or treat?" I mumble out, "Neither. Please go now." But he doesn't go. The glowing face starts moving towards me. Desperate to keep him out of my bedroom, I leap up and slam my door closed, locking it and pressing the full weight of my body against it. The guy is just outside my door. I can hear his deep breaths on the other side. He tries the door handle. It rattles. More heavy breaths. He tries the handle again. Then I can hear quick footsteps moving down the stairs, and what I think is my front door opening and closing. Still in shock, I just sit in my barricaded room, sobbing to myself until my mum finally returns. It felt like forever since I'd last seen her. She asked me what was wrong, why I was crying, and why there was a large Hessian sack left in the corridor. I told her what had just happened. She called the police for me immediately. I like to think that this was just a crazy person, and that they didn't really have any intention of harming me. Just some sort of messed up Halloween prank. Whatever the case, It was a surreal experience, and the image of that floating, talking face has haunted me for the longest time. The most unnerving part about this to me, though, is the fact that the peninsula really was very small. For me to see a face around town that I didn't recognize was very rare. More than likely, someone in my family knew who this person was. Hell, I probably knew who it was. I hate to think that after that event, I may very well have interacted with that person. The thought that they specifically targeted me out of everyone in the area made me extremely uncomfortable. I never felt safe there after that. That's part of the reason I moved away when I was 18. It was late October in Sofia, Bulgaria. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and my friend Minchko was throwing a massive shindig at his parents' apartment. Now, this guy was rich by Bulgarian standards, born into money. So when I say apartment, don't think of a typical, grotty Sofian flat. Think more along the lines of one of those unrealistically huge apartments from an American sitcom. His parents had gone away for the weekend to either Spain or Italy or somewhere else suitably warm, and as such, things were set to go wild. When the night finally rolled around, I dressed up in my zombie costume and set out to meet some friends. Minchko's invitation said that the party started at 8, so naturally, me and my group of chums didn't plan to arrive until 10. Gotta be fashionable. When we did arrive, most of the guests were already pretty drunk. The vodka was flowing freely, put it like that. They had a massive punch bowl, which was probably only 10% juice knowing Minchko. Some of us had a few midterm exams coming up, so we didn't want to go too wild. We just had a few beers, while everyone else pigged out on punch. Other than the people on my course, there was one other guy who wasn't really drinking that night. Some dude in a wolfman mask who was just hanging around the punch bowl. He didn't seem to know anybody at the party and was keeping to himself. Looked a little awkward, to be honest. The friendly half of me wanted to introduce myself, invite him to hang out with me and my friends. My socially anxious other half, however, decided against that. The night goes on, and one of the partiers starts to complain about having stomach pain. I figure he's overdone it. Some guys really can't handle their alcohol. He makes his way to the bathroom and starts vomiting. Not long afterwards, another guest starts complaining about the same problem, and then another, and another. Eventually, a dozen or so people are grabbing their stomachs in pain. Things start to seem serious, with some people even vomiting on the living room floor. A little worried, someone calls for medical assistance. At the hospital, things turned out not to be an extreme instance of alcohol poisoning. Instead, we found out that the punch bowl contained a secret ingredient that someone had slipped in. It had been laced with rat poison. Thankfully, the dosage wasn't high enough to kill anyone immediately, but without treatment, the amount could have been fatal within a few hours. At a party full of drunk people, it was totally possible that no one would have been sober enough to react appropriately and call an ambulance. Somebody also could have easily passed out, not realizing that they'd been poisoned. Thankfully, though many were hospitalized, nobody ended up with any prolonged health issues. When we were questioned about what we all knew, the guy in the wolf mask came into my mind. He had been hanging around the punch bowl. I mentioned it to the police, and said that one of the other guests must have known who he was. Talking to my friends about it afterwards, though, it seemed like nobody did know who he was. Everybody assumed that he was a friend of somebody else's, and didn't bother to question his attendance. As far as anybody could remember, nobody talked to him, nobody saw him without his mask on, and nobody even remembered who he turned up with, or even when he arrived at all. He had just slipped in unnoticed. To begin with, the police investigation turned up very little. It seemed as though it was just a one-off incident, some guy wanting to cause harm to a lot of people at once. But people like that rarely try this sort of thing only once. Almost 1 year later to the day, On the next Halloween weekend, the exact same thing happened at a party in a different part of town. This time, the amount of poison used was increased. 3 people almost lost their lives that night, and 10 were hospitalized. This time, however, the perpetrator was tackled by another partygoer who realized what he was up to. Under questioning, the police realized that the guy in the wolf mask was obviously a little disturbed in the head. He cited an event known as the Jonestown Massacre as his inspiration behind his actions. Looking into it, it turns out it was an event in the late 70s where over 300 members of a cult died after being forced to drink from a poisoned punch bowl. This unstable nutjob wanted to pay homage to the largest mass suicide in history. For the first time in my life, I was damn thankful that I had exams coming up. I'm known for going a little bit wild at parties, and for trying to drink everyone under the table. Who's to say I wouldn't have chugged more poison punch than my body could have handled? Whenever Minchko hosts a Halloween party now, he always checks under everyone's mask at the door, just to make sure they're on the guest list. Number 4. A few years ago, my aunt and her husband hired me to babysit for them. It was Halloween weekend, and they were going out to a party somewhere. Their son Josh, who was only 10 months old at the time, was a really simple kid to take care of. He rarely cried, and was really no trouble whatsoever. To top it off, he was super cute. Still is. Anyway, I arrive at their place, and they head off to their party, saying that they'll be back before 11 PM, and that if there's any problems, to call them immediately. The night was mostly routine. A couple of trick-or-treaters came to the door, but other than that, it was just me watching TV. The baby was asleep upstairs, and I had the monitor with me at all times. I also made sure to check up on him every 10 minutes or so. Call me paranoid, but whatever. I just wanted to make sure that he was okay. It's around 11:30 PM. Great. My aunt and uncle are taking longer than they said. I'm watching a Nick Cage movie while struggling to stay awake. This turned out to be a losing battle. I end up closing my eyes for what I thought was just a moment, but when I opened them and checked the clock, I realized I'd been asleep for almost half an hour. Fantastic. Nearly midnight, and they're still not back. I pick up the baby monitor, and immediately, something doesn't sound quite right. Baby Josh isn't crying or anything. I can hear his peaceful little breaths clearly through the device. But there's a slight creaking that seemed out of place. It sounded like the floorboards. Surely he hadn't gotten out of his cot and started taking his first steps. I couldn't help but wonder what that sound was. I get an uncomfortable feeling swell up inside me. I make my way to the foot of the stairs, and instinctively, uncomfortably, I lightly call out, "Joshy? I'm coming up now." I walk up the creaky steps and into where Josh was sleeping. He was laying there, completely comfortable and snug as a bug. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual. I watch over him for a few moments, and for whatever reason, decide to stay with him until his parents arrive. After another half an hour, I hear their car finally pull into the driveway. They enter the house, and I make my way downstairs to greet them. I expect them to ask how things were, or to give a friendly, sorry for being late. But instead, the first thing they ask me is, why is the spare key in the door? I went outside to check, and there it was. A key was in the front door, which obviously wasn't there when the pair had gone off to their party. They had both forgotten that they'd left a spare under the doormat and only remembered when they saw it. The door itself was still unlocked when they arrived back home. My uncle ran inside and searched the whole place thoroughly. Whoever had used that key to gain entrance to the house was now gone. I still don't know how they managed to sneak out under my very nose. 4 months after this incident, a human trafficking ring was busted in our area. The group didn't discriminate based on age. They'd sell women and young girls into domestic or sexual slavery, and babies to the highest bidder. Usually, this would be to people in the Far East that wanted a white child, but I guess all sorts of people were potential buyers. According to my uncle's friend who's in the force, it seems likely that this group had been staking out their house and realized that the spare key had been left under the mat. They didn't bother to rob the house when the whole family was out though. They were waiting until the baby became an easy target. Given enough time, an opportunity was bound to arise. When it did, that Halloween night, they took it, and I'm damn thankful that I woke up when I did. Thank God for baby monitors, that's all I can say. Number 5. I was at a Halloween party once, back in college. It was at a friend's place, with way more people crammed into it than it could comfortably accommodate. The music's blaring in the living room, and a group of us are dancing the night away. At one point, some of us start to get creeped out by this guy sat alone on the couch. He's in a full bunny costume, like a massive one that covers his entire body. For the whole time that we've been dancing, he hasn't moved. He's just been staring at us. I figure it's just some creepy guy perving on us dancing girls, thinking he's being inconspicuous behind his mask. I give it a few more minutes, and he's still just staring in our direction. I go over to the host, and I ask him, "Who's in that bunny costume over there?" He says that he's not sure, but apparently, that guy's been sat there for the past couple of hours, just staring at everyone who's been dancing, and hasn't moved the entire time. People had apparently gone over to talk to him, but he had just ignored them, and was being really antisocial. It seemed kind of strange to me that someone would go through the hassle of dressing up in a Halloween costume, but then when they get to the party, not really bother to socialise. Eventually, the host goes over to talk to the guy. Again, he doesn't respond, just keeps staring off onto the dance floor. The host gives him a poke. No response again. Not knowing who he was trying to talk to, the host forcibly takes off the guy's bunny mask. It's some guy I had never seen before, one of the host's roommate's best friends. He's deathly pale, and there's this white, foamy substance around his mouth. His eyes are turned back in his head, only the whites showing. Turns out that the guy had overdosed on some bad junk. He'd been dead for the past 2 hours on the couch while we were all dancing and partying around him. Because of the suit, nobody could tell, not even when his system was shutting down and he was convulsing. All the people who knew him were really torn up about it and wished that they'd realized what was happening sooner. Maybe if they caught him before he started to OD, they could have saved him. I just wanted to share this experience and don't want to turn it into a PSA, but please, party responsibly this Halloween. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, first things first, happy Halloween to all of my subscribers. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode, and I hope that your night goes very spookily, if that is indeed a word. But yeah, if you did enjoy this Halloween special, then please do be sure to leave a like down below. In fact, don't just press the button, smash it, or I'll smash you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and that way you'll be notified when my next video comes out, which, if everything goes according to plan, will be very, very soon. Until then guys, enjoy this very special time of the year. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. Happy Halloween.